Alright, so just to lay all my cards on the table, this video is pretty much just going to be for people who are insane Xeno heads like me. If you're not a fan of XENOSAGA or Xenoblade, then I'd really recommend leaving now because there's not much here for you. Basically, there's been quite a bit of talk about whether or not XENOSAGA and Xenoblade are connected recently, and whether or not we'll see a XENOSAGA trilogy re-release / XENOSAGA episode 4 within the next few years. From my observation of the community's general thoughts on this ever since Future Redeemed, I think there's been a little bit of a drop in how much of the fandom thinks that these two series will connect in any meaningful way. I, however, am still a true believer, and I wanted to make this video in order to show you all the evidence I've compiled that makes me believe that XENOSAGA has a future. This entire video will contain spoilers for pretty much the entirety of the XENOSAGA and Xenoblade series, including the new content in Xenoblade X Definitive Edition. I will also need to spoil a single plot event from around the middle of Final Fantasy VII for reasons, but I will timestamp that spoiler when we get to it if you would like to avoid it. I should also make clear that I will only be explaining pieces of evidence that pertain to my theory, i.e. this video assumes you are at least passingly familiar with XENOSAGA and Xenoblade lore as it stands as of the release of Xenoblade X DE. Alright, before I start discussing any pieces of evidence, I should establish the logic that most of my reasoning will be based off of in order to avoid any confusion. A good amount of my evidence for how XENOSAGA is connected comes from me interpreting and trusting the intent of Monolith Soft during certain specific scenes across the series. What I mean by this is, there are certain scenes that people have tried to point out as being evidence as a XENOSAGA-Xenoblade connection across the series due to the general composition / feel of important scenes in Xenoblade being similar to that of important scenes in XENOSAGA. However, these connections are often shot down due to small discrepancies between the XENOSAGA scene and the Xenoblade scene that would make a connection impossible. In this scenario, I will hold what I think to be Monolith Soft's intent in higher regard than any small discrepancy. I'll give you an example along with my first piece of in-game evidence for the connection. XENOSAGA 3, Xenoblade X DE, and Future Redeemed all end in a very similar manner, with a shot of a similar looking planet in outer space. A common theory for what this planet is Lost Jerusalem, the planet commonly believed to be what Cosmos is seen drifting towards at the end of XENOSAGA 3. With XDE, this is relatively easy to see. While we don't exactly get a clear shot of the entirety of the planet like at the end of XENOSAGA 3, we do see that the planet is blue and has a ring around it, both details consistent with Lost Jerusalem, so that's a fairly easy connection to make. But what about the end of Future Redeemed? Well, that game does also end with a shot of a blue planet and a blue light drifting towards it that could be Cosmos. However, the details with this planet don't seem to be as consistent with the planet from the end of XDE. The biggest sticking point being that this planet doesn't have a ring around it, and well, that kinda throws a wrench into things. If the Future Redeemed planet doesn't have a ring around it, does that mean that this planet can't actually be Lost Jerusalem? Is this just a visual reference to XENOSAGA 3 in order to represent a significant part of Monolith Soft's history, representing Monolith Soft's history arguably being what Future Redeemed is mostly about? Because of this missing detail, it feels like more and more people are steering away from what I am going to call connection theory as time goes on and the excitement from the infamous radio lore drop wanes. Maybe it was all just meant to be a heartwarming Easter egg. I believe thinking this way is missing a crucial part of understanding storytelling, that missing part being the author's intent. I strongly believe that what an author is trying to say through their work is always more important than the literal details of an event. There are no coincidences in storytelling or cinematography. When a scene is shot a certain way, it didn't just happen. A director chooses to frame scenes in a very intentional and specific way in order to make you feel a certain way or purposefully make you draw connections. Let me use an example from another game in order to illustrate what I mean. I am going to have to partially spoil Final Fantasy VII for this example, so skip to the time shown on screen or in the description if you want to avoid that. There's a section of FF7 where Barrett, one of your party members, is trying to track down one of his old friends, Dyne, who has gone on a rampage in the Gold Saucer. When you finally track down Dyne, you find out that, just like Barrett, Dyne has lost his arm. And just like Barrett, Dyne chose to replace his missing arm with a weapon. The game never acknowledges how much of a silly coincidence this is, nor does it try to explain how these two people who haven't seen each other since they first received their injuries would have somehow coordinated in order to get the same very oddly specific arm replacement. All that matters is that Barrett has a gun arm, Dyne has a gun arm, and those two things make a connection. Dyne's gun arm is FF7's way of visually telling you that Dyne and Barrett aren't so different. That, had Barrett not had the drive and support group that he did, especially with Marlene, he would have ended up just as aimlessly enraged and vengeful as Dyne. The reason I outline why author's intent is so important, especially when it comes to visual storytelling, is to get across why this sort of detailed nitpicking when it comes to scenes that are so obviously supposed to be evoking XENOSAGA is unproductive. Who cares if there isn't a clearly visible ring around Future Redeemed's planet? The writers could easily write up an excuse for that ring not being visible in that one particular moment, or they could just completely retcon it not being there. The really important thing to pay attention to is that everyone who's played through XENOSAGA 3, when they finished Future Redeemed and saw that planet, thought XENOSAGA 3, and there is no world that exists in which that's a coincidence. I refuse to believe that, especially after the radio lore dump, Monolith Soft would put in a scene that so clearly evokes XENOSAGA for it all to be dismissed because of one measly missing ring. The intent is what matters here, not the small discrepancies. To be perfectly honest, if the planet at the end of XDE didn't have a ring, I would still feel the same way about it that I do about the Future Redeemed planet. If anything, the fact that the shot of the sun illuminating the horizon line of the planet so clearly echoes the shot from XENOSAGA 3, where the sun illuminates the horizon line of the moon, means so much more to me when it comes to connecting X to XENOSAGA than a measly ring also being there. At the end of the day, regardless of the little inconsistencies, Monolith Soft chose to end these 3 games in a very similar manner. Also, just as a quick side note on the Future Redeemed planet, I personally believe that these little weird light effects on the top and bottom of the planet are supposed to be indicative of a ring. I know it's not obviously a ring like with X, but those light effects are so specific and weird to me. Why would they add in those weird light effects if they didn't want you to notice them? The planet already forms from a ball of light, why add those distinct effects that look like they might be the curvature that forms a ring? Alright, that's probably the longest rant that I'll have in this video, so let's get on to some other pieces of in-game evidence. Let's talk about that Future Redeemed blue light. My thoughts on the blue light are essentially a smaller version of my thoughts on the planets. Basically, while the theory that the blue light was Cosmos was very strong when Future Redeemed first released, people have started to lean more in favor of the light being the White Whale 2 from the end of XDE due to waning confidence in connection theory. Again, I think the intent behind what the blue light is supposed to make you think of is more important than what the light literally is. You want to know what the blue light literally is? Just that. A blue light. It's a light the developers made fly across the scene they made. What it actually is doesn't matter. The point is that it reminded people of Cosmos at first, and then later, when XDE released, it made people think of the White Whale too. While discussion of the ending of XDE is still in its infancy, I don't think it's hard to imagine that people will eventually get caught up in the thinking that if the blue light is the White Whale too, then it can't be Cosmos, because the blue light can't be 2 things at the same time. It has to be one or the other. You can probably guess how I feel about this hypothetical argument. It doesn't matter if the blue light realistically could only be 1 thing and not 2. All that matters is that the light is supposed to make you think Cosmos and White Whale, and thinking about both of those things contained within Future Redeemed's ending makes you think connection. Hell, the fact that some people were thinking that the blue light was the White Whale, or Elma in the Ares, and therefore were thinking that X was going to connect to mainline Xenoblade even before XDE came out, strengthens connection theory even further. Regardless of whether or not you think the White Whale 2 ended up on Future Redeemed's planet, the fact stands that a good amount of people saw that light and thought Xenoblade X connection. And hey, what do you know? XDE did end up connecting X to the mainline series. If not by them being in the mainline universe at the end of the game, then certainly by explicitly confirming that X exists within the same multiverse as the mainline games. One connection with the blue light has, in some form, come true. Why wouldn't the other, even more commonly held belief as to what the blue light represents also come true? Alright, let's look at some outside of game material now. Monolith Soft's 25th anniversary video has been under scrutiny for containing evidence supporting connection theory before, so that's a good place to start. The Monolith Soft 25th anniversary video showcases footage from every game Monolith Soft has made, sans Xenogears. This is most likely because Square Enix seems very unwilling to do anything significant with the Xenogears license themselves, let alone let anyone else so much as touch the property. So Xenogears' absence from this trailer is most likely due to a lack of ability to use footage from the game than it is from a lack of want to represent Xenogears on Monolith Soft's part. Anyway, at the end of the trailer, we see 9 characters from the Xeno series standing together while watching the memories of Monolith Soft's legacy drift around them. Those 9 characters are Rex, Pyra, Mithra, Noah, Mio, Shulk, Fiora, and most importantly for the purposes of this video, Elma and Cosmos. Basically, I have reason to believe that all 9 of those characters shown are recent characters currently relevant to the Xeno series, and that is also very much the case for Cosmos, even though we haven't seen that one come to fruition. Yet. I'll explain myself. By the time this anniversary video came out, we knew that at least the 7 mainline Xenoblade characters pictured here were very recently relevant to the series, even if they originated from games earlier than Xenoblade 3, the most recently released full new game. This is because Future Redeemed made characters like Rex and Shulk, as well as the families of those characters, important to the events of Xenoblade 3. Admittedly, the presence of Fiora and Pyra and Mithra is felt a little less than Shulk and Rex, but they are still very much important. At the very least, we can reasonably assume that all of those characters were vital in the lives and upbringing of their children. You know, the children who are party members in Future Redeemed and are vitally important to the creation of the city that exists in base game Xenoblade 3. And if that doesn't satisfy you, then how about the fact that Fiora's soul is implied to rest within Lucky 7, along with the rest of Xenoblade 1's party, as well as Numa's core crystal being held within Matthew's gauntlets. Then we have Elma. When this anniversary video initially came out, we had little reason to believe that Elma would be important to the mainline Xenoblade series, nor did we have reason to believe the X universe would ever connect to the mainline universe, besides the blue light, of course. We initially just thought that Elma and Cosmos were there because they're the faces of other games that share the name Xeno. Well, we already know how that turned out with Elma, don't we? Whether you think it's by universe or just by the multiverse, X and Elma are undoubtedly connected to mainline Xenoblade now. And you're gonna tell me, after all that consistency between the other 8 characters, that Cosmos is just there to represent XENOSAGA? I don't buy it. Cosmos and XENOSAGA are getting connected. It's just a matter of when, not if. Also, this isn't as big of a sticking point, but it's still worth addressing. No, Cosmos using her old Xenoblade 2 model in this video doesn't mean that a new version of her model doesn't exist because there's no XENOSAGA 4 or XENOSAGA Trilogy remake in the works. This might have worked when the video originally came out, but that evidence holds no weight with the existence of XDE. Elma uses her Xenoblade 2 model in this video. I can't be exactly sure of when this video was made, but I do know that it released on October 1st of 2024, and Xenoblade XDE was announced October 29th of that same year, literally less than a month later. Even if they somehow didn't have Elma's new model when they were making this video, they definitely were knee-deep in the development of XDE when they were making the video. Plus, why would they use a new Cosmos model for a video that comes out before the announcement of a new XENOSAGA project? That would just spoil the surprise, similar to how using Elma's new model in this video would have completely spoiled the surprise for XDE. These next couple of points I 100% was informed of from Luxin's video on them, so if you want a much more in-depth breakdown on why these points are good evidence of XENOSAGA returning, watch those videos and give Luxin the love he deserves. Links in the description. The Japan-exclusive mobile game for Bandai Namco's Tales of series, Tales of the Rays, had a crossover with XENOSAGA 3 starting in the last month of 2023 and concluding within the first month of 2024. The crossover was pretty substantial, as it contained a handful of XENOSAGA outfits for characters to wear as well as, most significantly, a completely new Cosmos model that was used for her appearance as a new playable character in that game. Seems like quite a lot to do for a dead series with a very small fanbase. Also, around March of 2024, there was a Kickstarter for an officially licensed piano arrangement album of select songs from XENOSAGA Episode 1. That is, 2, a little much for a dead game series with a small fanbase. By the way, that Kickstarter ended up having over 100,000 USD pledged to it, reaching all of its stretch goals. So, I know that I was just joking about how small the XENOSAGA fanbase is, but if you think XENOSAGA not being profitable in the modern day is what would keep Bandai from greenlighting any new XENOSAGA projects, that number from that Kickstarter might be worth keeping in mind. On the topic of debunking monetary/popularity reasons why Bandai might not want to greenlight new XENOSAGA projects, I actually want to steal this idea from a YouTube comment under Luxin's video about the radio scene by @Biscottoplays. Quote, "Even if Future Redeemed didn't happen, there's no way Bandai saw a Xeno game nominated for Game of the Year and didn't instantly start thinking of porting XENOSAGA." End quote. Yeah, the simple fact of the matter is that the Xeno name has a lot more power behind it since the last XENOSAGA game that released almost 20 years ago. I know that this series was cut short once before because it wasn't profitable, but that was then, and this is now. Xeno is semi-popular now. The Xeno name on a new game/remaster would be a boon to Bandai now, not a hindrance. My final piece of evidence is, to those who want more concrete evidence from recent developments, probably my weakest. But I still think it's worth noting, and it makes a nice capstone to the video, so I'm gonna use it anyway. I've talked about how XENOSAGA 3, Future Redeemed, and XDE all end in a very similar way visually. What I haven't talked about is how XENOSAGA 3 and Xenoblade 3 both end in a very similar manner thematically. XENOSAGA 3 and Xenoblade 3 both end with a promise, that the characters within those stories will meet again. In my mind, this is also a promise to the player. We will see these characters again. And from a certain perspective, with Future Redeemed, we did. We once again saw characters like Shulk, Rex, and Alvis. Xenoblade 3, after ending with the messaging it did, kept its promise. In light of everything I've presented you with today, I think it's finally time that XENOSAGA did the same. In the same way that we said welcome back to Shulk and Rex, I think it's time we got to say welcome back to Cosmos. Thank you for watching. My name's Casey, and you've been a wonderful audience. Till next time.